Hello and welcome to SecureWorld Behind the Scenes, our exclusive interview series. This is Tom Bechtold, your co-host for today's program. Thank you all for joining us. Today we have Bruce Sussman, Director of Web Content from the SecureWorld Media team, talking with Gretel Egan and Kurt Wescoe from Proofpoint Security Awareness Training, formerly Wombat Security. We'll be talking about the annual State of the Phish Report. Before we get going with the interview, I do want to quickly introduce Gretel is our Security Awareness and Training Strategist at Proofpoint Security Awareness Training, and Kurt Wescoe is the Chief Architect there. And certainly we want to give a shout out Bruce Sussman, Director of Digital Content. Bruce, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to you.
Thank you, Tom, and Gretel and Kurt, thank you so much for joining us as part of our behind-the-scenes interview series. Really excited to know more about the state of the Phish Report. And I thought before we dive into details, and we want to get some key takeaways for our security audience, but first of all, if you would one of you kind of give me a high-level overview of this year's report?
Sure, Bruce. This is Gretel, and thanks again for having us today. We've been doing the State of the Phish Report. This is our 5th annual report, and every year we compile data from multiple sources. This year, I think we really have a more robust set of data than ever before, and it's as in years past, we cover about a 1-year measurement period. And in this case, we looked at tens of millions of simulated phishing emails that our customers sent to their end users between October 2017 and September 2018. Within that set of data, we look at information from 16 different industries. We also look across some departments, failure rates by departments as well. We also did a survey, quarterly surveys actually, of our database of InfoSec professionals, and these are customers and non-customers. And we had about 15,000 responses to quarterly surveys sent last year. Those surveys are really intended to kind of get a sense of what these security professionals are experiencing, the phishing impacts that they're dealing with, and the things they're doing to kind of combat the threat and address the issue. We also this year did an end user survey, a working adult survey really. This was to more than 7,000 working adults across 7 countries. It was a third-party survey, 5 questions. And really in that survey we were looking to kind of gauge some of the fundamental recognition of cybersecurity terminology that is so commonly used by InfoSec teams today, terms like phishing and ransomware. And so by doing that, what we really wanted to look at was, how do people that are currently in the workplace around the globe, what are the basic things that they know about cybersecurity terminology, and some of those terms that teams are likely to be using when they're going out to their end users and doing some awareness training.
Well, that is a fantastic overview, and it doesn't surprise me that you list all those different sources of data because oftentimes I'm interviewing CISOs and those in charge of security for their organizations, and this clearly in their mind is a benchmark of what's happening around security awareness and also phishing and things like that. And Gretel, I'm wondering, one of the things that I've heard from these executives is that they feel like there's actionable information inside the State of the Phish Report. Can you give us a little insight into how you build it that way?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we recognize that there obviously are a lot of reports and a lot of data points out there. So we really did concentrate, in particular this year, on that actionable data and advice. As you mentioned, in general, we're a pretty data-driven organization. We really believe in the importance of tracking activities and using metrics to breed a more successful approach and a more successful program. So the State of the Phish Report is, it's not just about presenting data for data's sake. It's really taking what we found and offering recommendations about how organizations can use those findings to take a more people-centric approach to cybersecurity, which we believe is so important right now with attackers focusing on people. We feel that organizations also have to, in turn, put their focus on their users. And then, using data to help deliver the right training to the right people at the right time. It's so important to be able to not only know what your data is looking like, but how you can use that data to make things better for your organization.
Okay, that makes sense for sure. I'm wondering if you can unpack that just a little bit. Maybe give us an example of something that you think fits the bill.
Sure. So like Gretel mentioned about giving you actual deep data that helps you to take actionable decisions and do things readily within your program right away, not these sort of high-level analyses. It's things like, our very attacked people viewpoint and our departmental analysis. They really try to call that out and allow you to understand that, look, there is differences in how people are failing for these types of phish and simulated attacks, as well as how attackers are attacking them. And like Gretel mentioned with the people-centric approach, that's really what this report is aiming to help arm you with, that if you're not doing anything, you can at least get a view of how other industries and other organizations like you are being attacked and what they're seeing on that front and what their end users are failing for, to help you start to craft your program and decide what type of phish should I be sending, what type of training should I be delivering, and what types of skills and learning do my users need to be able to put into practice to defend my organization as effectively as possible.
I'll add on to that as well, Bruce. When we're talking about that kind of actionable data in specific in our report. So one thing we found in looking at the ways that our customers are assessing their end users' vulnerability to phishing is that there was really a strong preference during our measurement period for using link-based phishing tests. And within our platform, program administrators can choose from 3 primary template styles. One is that link-based test, another is an attached-based style, and then we have a data entry-based style. And that latter one is really where the recipients are ultimately asked to submit some sort of sensitive data, be it login credentials or something else. And of all the simulated attacks that were sent during our measurement period, 69% of them were link-based tests. 17% were data entry tests, and just 14 were attachment-based tests. So, why is it significant that the data entry tests were low, a low percentage? Well, we found that 65% of the InfoSec professionals that we surveyed said that their organizations experienced account compromise as a result of phishing attacks in 2018. And this was the most commonly named impact, and it leapfrogged past malware infections as the most common impact named by the people we surveyed. So this was a 70% year-over-year increase in reports of credential compromise, and it's actually up 280% since 2016. So given that, we looked at that, and it is somewhat concerning that so few organizations are testing their user susceptibility to those data entry style lures. And so we recommend that program administrators begin to use more of these types of campaigns in their programs to test users' vulnerability to that.
Okay, so a lot of information, and I actually was amazed as I looked through the report at all the different topics and areas that you cover. And I'm wondering personally, I don't want to get too personal, but I am curious both from you, Curt, and you, Gretel, and maybe Curt, you start this one. What was an eye-opening finding for you?
So maybe not surprisingly, but the thing that jumped out to me had to do with the departmental analysis. This is the first year that we've really dug in and taken a look at how different departments are performing on simulated attacks. But what we have seen in this is that there's really a misalignment between how organizations are phishing their users and how they're actually being attacked. While even previously we'd seen that the corporate phish tend to be the ones that people pick the most, and where we've seen companies drive their rates down on, last year really was, we'll say, the year of account compromise and credential phishing. Throughout the year, there was a variety of attacks, whether it was 365 type things that were very prevalent, or scams that were leveraging internal emails, posing as a malicious insider, or posing as an insider, asking you to take action. And while we've seen that people are phishing and hitting their different departments with the corporate type phish around services they're using, they're not hitting the cloud services nearly as much. And we think they're not really used, and we didn't see a lot of usage of the phish in the wild as much as one would expect. And so to us, seeing that the failure rates being greater on those and there not being as much targeting of that really jumped out that organizations aren't using the threat landscape to inform how they're doing their simulated attack programs.
One kind of eye-opening thing for me was, of course, that we saw phishing attacks increase. I think I was surprised to see the rate jump as much as it did, and actually to see that InfoSec professionals said across the board that all types of social engineering attacks they saw within their organizations were increasing, including smishing, that SMS phishing, and phishing, voice phishing, and even USB attacks jumped up. Now, certainly phishing attacks saw the biggest jump of those. It went up to 83% in 2018 versus 76% in 2017. But I think it's significant to note that even though something like USB increased a very small amount, going from 3% to 4%, may be statistically insignificant. However, it is certainly indicative of the fact that attackers are really using all available inroads to get to users, and it speaks to the need to educate users about social engineering techniques in general, not just in the way those are applied with email attacks.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point, Gretel. And when you think about it, the motivation level of the attacker, can spur them to do pretty much anything, right? I mean, if it's worth it to them. So that's really a great point. So those are kind of the things that popped out to you. I'm wondering about a key takeaway, or is there one? I mean, I know there's a list of them, but can you pick just one that you would want security professionals to have from the 2019 State of the Phish?
Yeah, I think I'd say the biggest takeaway is using all of this information to their benefit. And what I mean there is that you have to balance out your broad needs and sort of your more targeted needs. And, broadly, you might decide that you want to do a lot better, say, on attachment type campaigns because you had some internal challenges with those last year. Your users are weaker there. And you want to make sure that you do some phishing and do some attack and training around that. While also leveraging in some of the real-world attacks that you're seeing and potentially marrying those two pieces together. A challenge you can see organizations facing is they're seeing some of this data and saying that, I need to be looking at exactly what I got last month, is that you run the risk of training your users around exactly what's happening right now. And in the same vein, you can't rely on the fact that you had a low failure rate, for example, on a credential phish from January, because attackers, as we've seen with some of our attack spotlights and stuff we've rolled out, that credential phish has changed month to month in terms of the tactics that are being used. And so I think a real takeaway is you have to try to balance out how you're trying to deal with the threat landscape that exists today, while also trying to raise your overall security knowledge within your team and getting them better overall at detecting phish and reporting them. Because ultimately what you want to be able to do is use your end users to help understand what's getting through while also educating them, and then improve your filter on the front end as well.
So for me, one thing that I would really stress to InfoSec teams is getting a better understanding of your end users in general. And I mentioned when we started that we included results from that 5-question, 7-country survey of working adults. And as I said, our goal there was to determine end users' recognition of commonly used terms. It's important for InfoSec teams to understand that the language that they speak so readily and so commonly is not the same language that is necessarily spoken by their end users. So it's very likely that a good percentage of the people working in an organization, if someone has never taken the time to define phishing and to define ransomware for those people at a fundamental level, they're not really understanding the conversation, and particularly if those terms are being commonly used. And one thing I really want to point out is that in addition to looking kind of in a broad global sense and individual region sense at some of the understanding of these terms, we did some analysis by age groups. And we did this specifically to compare how millennials, really a very important demographic for organizations worldwide right now, how they are comparing against their counterparts. And what we found that was, although these are digital natives, I mean, they've grown up with technology and they're very comfortable with cyber technologies, they are not necessarily well-versed in cybersecurity fundamentals. So, in fact, millennials were outperformed by at least one other age group in all the questions that we asked. And baby boomers, who are arguably the least tech-savvy of the groups within the workforce right now, they were actually the ones who exhibited the best recognition of phishing and ransomware terminology. So the caution here is that organizations should really not be assuming that as their workers are getting younger, that they're bringing with them a higher level and an innate sense of cybersecurity along with that high level of cyber comfort.
Yeah, that is definitely flying in the face of conventional wisdom there, because we've heard for quite some time the digital natives were going to make a difference when it comes to cybersecurity, and I'm sure they will, but you don't take it for granted. So that's great. So that's some of the demographic differences. I'm wondering about any regional differences of interest that you may have come across. I know this spanned continents, this research. So what did you find there?
Yeah, so one of the ones that jumped out the most was ransomware. There we saw the biggest spread between 30 and 60% in terms of what users, how many percentage of users were able to correctly identify what a ransomware attack is and what is not. But across the board with these topics, that tended to exist, whether it was smishing or vishing or USB type things. There was different levels of knowledge regionally. What we also found with that type of results too was that there tends to be a pretty long curve in terms of awareness around these topics, and I think this would generalize to any type of emerging threat or threats that aren't sort of coming common knowledge. Phishing would be one where we'd say we had pretty consistent results, 60-some% or above across all regions knowing it. But when you dug into some of these, I think it depends upon whether attacks have been perpetrated there, or whether countries have really focused on organizations, those areas have focused on awareness and training their users around those. So you can't really assume just because a thing has not been in your area or because you've spent some time on it that generally all workers in your country know that. So really what comes in with that is as you're onboarding new employees, you really have to take it a baseline that you don't know anything and focus on the things that are important to you.
Yeah, just actually adding on to that, from an InfoSec perspective, we saw some regional differences as well. Going to the ransomware topic, we saw that InfoSec pros in EMEA were significantly more likely to say that they saw ransomware attacks last year than all other regions. And in the Asia-Pacific region, those organizations were far more likely to experience phishing and smishing attacks on a regular basis. In that region, InfoSec professionals were 5 times more likely than those in EMEA to say that they faced more than 26 of those types of attacks per quarter. And so then when we correlate that back to what we found out with those working adults, kind of a bright spot for people in that region, we did find that working adults in Japan and Australia were significantly more familiar with phishing and smishing terminology than their global counterparts. That said, we still did see between 30 and 40% of users in that region not able to identify the correct definitions of smishing and phishing. So even though it's a pretty good understanding in comparison to others around the globe, that there's a significant need in that region, obviously, to be protecting against those kinds of attacks because they are so frequent and because they can, be significantly damaging. So this really points to a need for Asia-Pac organizations to focus on, raising that fundamental awareness and understanding of those threats, and training workers to be really diligent about the text messages and phone calls they're receiving. And I think when we look at that type of correlation, people around the globe should be looking at, what does it look like regionally for me from an end user awareness perspective, and do I need to focus on raising awareness of particular things given what I'm seeing coming into my organization? I think making that correlation is really important.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's a great point. And the last thing that I have, I will still tell you that I am surprised, as long as we've been talking about security awareness, as long as we've been talking about phishing, that according to the 2019 State of the Phish, even in the U.S., 35% of working adults could not properly identify the term phishing. I mean, from a bullet point checklist kind of thing, like a test you took in high school. And I know, Gretel, you said InfoSec may not be speaking the language. That's part of the issue. But something else you said, I believe, was that we're really just in the infancy when it comes to security awareness training and this kind of work. I mean, is that true? Because it seems like we've been talking about it for a while.
I mean, I would say, that was something I talked about in the SecureWorld webinar last week when I began my presentation. I do really believe that security awareness training from an execution standpoint is really in its infancy. I think people have, been talking about it. Obviously, there's a market for it. Obviously, that market has grown. But the story that I shared at the beginning of the webinar was, I've been in the workforce for about 25 years. When I began in the workforce, the internet was really in its infancy. Curt is a fellow CMU person, but he is younger than I am. I remember Mosaic as a preliminary browser, and it took about 10 minutes to get online, and you sat there thinking, do I actually even want to do this? So 25 years later, clearly leaps and bounds ahead of where we were then. People are relying heavily on email, have completely changed the way they work. But I will say that when I came to Wombat, and that was about 5 years ago, that was really the first time I ever heard of a focus on making sure that people knew how to safely use these pieces of technology. And even 5 years on from that now, there's still plenty of organizations that are doing nothing from a security awareness training standpoint, plenty that are just talking about it once or maybe twice a year. So that, in my mind, is what puts security awareness training still in its infancy from a development and execution standpoint, and where we're getting, touches on enough people across the globe to really raise that collective conscience.
Yeah, we've really seen the shift in the last 5 years from it being an afterthought / a check-the-box piece of your security program to being actually integrated and married with what you do as an organization, and considering your users as part of your program and something that can add value to other pieces of it. I mean, we've seen training shift from a place where it was just, at the end, we recorded the fact that you completed it, and we didn't try to gain anything about what did you learn or think about what can I try to educate my users and improve them about. To something now where more vendors putting in things and allowing you to be able to assess what questions we're trying to teach you and how many learners got them, and then breaking that down more granular to see how departments and different places are doing. So I think we're really in the infancy of treating our end users as part of our security program and seeing that they can help, like I said earlier, feedback mails that are getting through my filter and help me improve my filtering and gateway technology up front, and also be able to look at them as a piece, something that raises my security, not just this check the box that I have to train about stuff, but I expect nothing back from.
Yeah, and that's a great point, and that's a huge difference in all areas of security and compliance. What's it really about, checking the box or actually a sincere effort? So that's fantastic. I want to say thanks to both of you for your insights. Thanks for sharing this report and taking us behind the scenes on the report as well, because it is an industry benchmark, and really appreciate your expertise. And now I will hand it back over to Tom.
Thank you, Bruce. And again, echoing Bruce's sentiments, thank you, Gretel and Curt, for sharing your thoughts with us today. Certainly hope everybody learned a little something from today's interview, perhaps some reminders or things you can start doing within your organization as it relates to security awareness training. Be on the lookout for future behind-the-scenes interviews with our media team. On behalf of SecureWorld Digital, I'd like to thank you all again for your time and participation today.